Hi, everyone. Greetings from Baltimore, Maryland, the home of the Peabody Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. It's great for you that we're so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Abra Bush, and I'm the Senior Associate Dean of Institute Studies here at Peabody. I'm delighted you could join us today for our conversation about trauma-informed work. We've got a wonderful panel to speak with you today about the things that they do and how that might apply to your own teaching and your own work. Before we get started, as always, I want to thank Peabody staff members who are always behind the scenes and supporting our events. Adam Scalici from Peabody's production team will be monitoring the webinar and working through any technical challenges we have. Please don't hesitate to send your comments or requests to Adam. Anna Harris from the Concert and Ensemble Office is providing additional support in the background. And Christina Mancior from Peabody's Launchpad is helping me curate your questions. In addition, I should also add that we have an incredible marketing team behind the scenes who gets the website ready and sends out emails and helps to get you all here. So a special thank you to Lauren Krul, Tiffany Lundquist, and that team. A few notes before we begin. I see many of you are already enculturated to hop right into the chat and send a note to the panelists and the attendees about who you are and where you're from. We'd love for you to do that, and we'd love for you to consider this an interactive session. So don't hesitate to continue to utilize that chat function throughout this conversation. The presenters are going to start with presentations about their work and how trauma-informed teaching practices and pedagogy and other sorts of work fit into what they do. So we'd like to ask you to please put any questions you may have right into the Q&A as they come up, and then we'll easily find them and then answer those as we go in this process. The presenters have agreed to allow us to record this webinar. The session will take a couple days for us to process, and then it'll be posted to the Keep Teaching website, and we'll also send you a link. So it is forthcoming, have no worries. And now, without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome our guest presenters for today. Michael O'Brien comes to us from the Curtis Institute, Tiffany Ortiz from Carnegie Hall, Dr. Jillian Rogers from Indiana University Jacobs School of Music, and Dr. Raphael Travis, Texas State University School of Social Work. All of their bios and headshots are on our Keep Teaching website. Don't hesitate to head over there to find out more about these fabulous people. All right, without further ado, Jill Rogers is leading us off to talk a little bit about how trauma-informed work is relevant to what she does at IU. Jill, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Abra. Can everybody see my slides? Yes? Okay, wonderful. So we got together last week with Abra, the panelists got together with Abra, and she asked a couple of questions, and I basically ended up centering my presentation on these, and they were, how do you define the work of doing trauma-informed teaching or work in general, and then how do you practice the work? So I thought I'd just begin by talking about what I understand as trauma-informed. So for me, being trauma-informed means knowing that trauma happens, and more frequently than we might think, and allowing this knowledge, as well as knowledge about the effects of trauma and approaches to processing it, to shape in meaningful ways how I approach everyone I encounter and everything I do as a human moving through the world. I'm very committed to removing the stigma around trauma and mental illness. I really feel very strongly that trauma shouldn't be a bad word. It's a reality, and I think that this has come to be much more understood with and acknowledged with COVID-19, but I hope that the attention to and acknowledgement of trauma doesn't actually stop once the pandemic is over, in part because the traumatic effects of the pandemic probably won't be completely evident for some time. I also think it's important to note that I see trauma as stemming not just from exceptional events, which is the way that it has perhaps been traditionally understood, but also as stemming from ongoing daily situations caused by structural racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, and other forms of injustice, inequality, and discrimination. I learned about trauma-informed pedagogy because I was researching relationships between music and trauma, and I wanted to teach courses on this topic. It's not only my pedagogy that is trauma-informed, but also my research and my interactions with others in all sorts of capacities. Lessons from my research inform my pedagogy and vice versa. I have several big overarching aims and goals in approaching my work in trauma-informed ways. The first is to teach and present work in order to raise awareness around mental health and to work as and or to become a disability studies and mental health advocate. The second is to teach others about the widespread effects of trauma and tools for processing trauma so that they might adopt trauma-informed practices as part of their approach to research, teaching, and life. And then finally, another goal that I have in trauma-informed work is to teach and present work in ways that acknowledge people's experiences and support them in processing trauma if need be, rather than doing further harm. So in terms of how I accomplish these goals, as I noted, I'm a pretty traditional academic. So I publish, I give talks in academic and non-academic settings. I teach about trauma and I organize events around trauma, disability, mental health, and music. So here, this is basically the front of a program book. Some of our attendees will recognize this because they participated in this wonderful event. I was glad to see that when I looked at the attendees list, but this past February, along with Erin Brooks and Michelle Meinhardt as my faculty co-organizers, and Jackie Fortier and Jess Bachman as grad student co-organizers, I organized this concert, Music, Sound, and Trauma Interdisciplinary Perspectives. And it brought together in a virtual setting people from all over the world working on these topics as practitioners, educators, academics, performers, and composers. The conference, I feel, helped to articulate, but also welcome and create a community of people working on these topics so that we could mutually support one another and learn from one another. Also in February 2021, February was a busy month, I published my first monograph, Resonant Recoveries, French Music and Trauma Between the World Wars. So here I use historical sources and trauma theory to address how musicians active in France during and after World War I came to understand music as an embodied therapeutic practice that could help them to process grief and trauma. And at the end of my book writing process, I realized that the whole project was actually more about getting music scholars and musicians to think about mental health than it was about telling the stories of these particular musicians. Academics, in my opinion, don't think or talk enough about trauma. In many instances, they barely acknowledge this, and I don't feel like this is really helping anyone. So I ended up framing the book in terms of the importance of acknowledging people's feelings far beyond this particular context of interwar France. And then from 2018 to present, I've taught 3 courses on music and trauma and 1 course on disability studies for undergraduate students at University College Cork in Ireland, as well as for graduate music students at Jacobs School of Music at IU. The courses have been really well attended, very well enrolled, and some of students' favorite courses from what I can gather informally from students. So these are just kind of some of the broader context. I thought I'd talk about some of the specifics that I undertake in practicing trauma-informed work. And the first is that I emphasize agency. Almost every source I've encountered on trauma and trauma-informed pedagogy suggests that agency is really important because in instances of trauma, people often feel as if they've lost control. And so being trauma-informed for me means helping people feel in control again. So I emphasize student agency by giving them a lot of choice about a variety of different things. So for instance, whether or not to attend class, I offer trigger warnings, and I always tell my students that if they can't attend a class or they can't read an article or they can't listen to a piece of music, then that's completely fine. I also give my students choice about which assignments to do. I give them multiple essay prompts that they can choose from so they don't ever feel like backed into having to answer one particular question or do one particular kind of assignment. Especially during COVID, I've become a lot more flexible about late work than I used to be, and I'm actually glad about that. I think that that will be something that I take forward with me. So I'm fine with pushing back dates, and as long as students communicate with me, I allow them to submit late work. And I should say also that I gave trigger warnings and emphasized choice options and agency in the Music, Sound, and Trauma conference that I organized. So for instance, we asked people to provide trigger warnings, but we didn't require it. And we also gave folks the option of pre-recording or presenting live, because basically I wanted to reduce the amount of stress somebody was experiencing in trying to present at a conference. The other thing that I do in my trauma-informed work is I commit to predictability. So I give people a sense of what to expect, and then I stick to that. Predictability and stability of expectations is something else that comes up a lot in trauma literature. So I am reliable as much as I can be. I err on the side of things taking longer than expected, and I communicate my schedule to my students. And I also, as hard as this can be sometimes, I try to keep my mood as stable as I can, especially in the classroom. I tried to, and I think I've succeeded in this. I never really fly off the handle, no matter what kind of day I'm having. I mean, this is easier with college age students, but still not perfect. And then I also facilitate community building. So the conference would be one example of me attempting to build community amongst not just academics, but practitioners, educators, etc. I also talk with a lot of different people about what I do, and I welcome them into doing similar work with me, collaborative projects with me, if they'd like. And I've had quite a bit of success in creating a community of scholars who work on similar issues. I also help my students to create community by giving them opportunities to talk together and work together. And some of this happens because I model vulnerability in my classrooms so that my students might also be willing to be vulnerable. And this mutual vulnerability, I found, often results in students feeling as if they are part of a close-knit community and creating that close-knit community amongst themselves. So for instance, I tell my students about my experience as a trauma survivor because that is central to who I am and what I do. And I also do a lot of goofier things to foster community. So during COVID, and I teach a very early morning class, for instance, we've had pajama days where I even come in pajamas along with my students. And for them, they even told me that like pajama day tended to facilitate more intense conversations. People were more willing to open up. It felt a little bit more like a slumber party. So that's a really kind of cool thing to come out of COVID, and something that I'll probably continue in the future post-COVID. And then the final thing that I do is I provide people opportunities to focus on their bodies and emotions. Here again, vulnerability and modeling vulnerability are key. My approach as a researcher of trauma and someone who teaches trauma actually can't be separated from my experiences as someone who has experienced trauma and continues to live with PTSD. And what I've learned through my research, both of historical communities like the ones I discuss in my book, and also contemporary psychology, and also my experiences as a trauma survivor, is that trauma affects and is affected by bodies, bodily movements, bodily processes, and bodily sensations. So the work of Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, Resmaa Menakem, and so many amazing somatic therapists who I've been blessed to work with have really taught me the importance of attending to bodies, to feelings, and to emotions when processing trauma. And even in instances when you're not aware that you're processing trauma. So I encourage students and colleagues to pay attention to their bodies, sometimes through musical experiences, sometimes through stretching, and sometimes through other bodily movements or attentions. I do this in the classroom. I also do this outside of the classroom. I encourage students to read or to think more about body trauma intertwinings, perhaps more than our class might cover. I give students opportunities to voice their feelings, and I allow them to focus on emotions and sensations as long as they're comfortable in doing so. I don't ever force anybody to do that. And I offer, especially for classes that deal with trauma, because those classes tend to be tough, I offer mindfulness practices at the end of every class that students have the option to stay over in the Zoom session for. And I've done that when I've taught in person as well. And so basically, I'll just end by saying that my hope is to create a more compassionate field of music studies through creating more compassionate music studies practitioners in whatever forms these take. That's all. Thank you.
Jill, thank you so much. I note that Christina did put into the chat some of the work you did in the conference in February. And so I would encourage everyone to go take a look at that link if you've not already. And I think I might also take the idea of pajama days. That sounds perfect right now, doesn't it?
They're pretty fantastic, yeah.
So Jill works a lot with collegiate students, of course, and graduate students, but Tiffany, you're working with people at the other end of that spectrum. How does your trauma-informed practice play out there?
Thanks. I will share my screen. So I'm Tiffany Ortiz. I am the Director of Early Childhood Programs at Carnegie Hall. And I'm here to share a little bit about the Lullaby Project, which is a specific community project in which families write, sing, and record personal lullabies for their children. Now, the program began in 2011 in New York City in partnership with a local public hospital, and it was actually the staff at that hospital that approached us. And they were working with a group of young teenage mothers who were experiencing a great deal of stress, trauma, and they noted that that was really impacting their connection to their children. And they asked us, what role can music play in supporting the well-being of these mothers? What role can music play in supporting the connection and bond between parent and child? So the goals of this program were really centered in that. We started this work in healthcare. It now expands to reach not just mothers, but fathers, extended family members in high schools, healthcare settings, foster care, homeless shelters, correctional facilities, refugee camps, treatment centers, and other community centers, particularly communities that are most impacted by social inequalities, much like what Jill pointed out earlier in her presentation. The Lullaby Project does take place around the world. We have over 40 partners, including universities and students who are participating to bring this project to their communities and to best serve the families and the communities that they're serving. So what does this look like, right? In action, teaching artists who often undergo a great deal of training and support to help facilitate these sessions are paired with parents to work one-on-one together. And often there's a lot of trust building activities, even just healing centered activities like breathing, getting to know each other. And then we have a series of prompts that we use. One of our most popular one is this letter. It's write a letter to your child that expresses your hopes, your dreams, your wishes for yourself and also for your child. It's a space in which you can explore and share your culture, your joy, and your language. So as you can see, this parent decided she really wanted to write her lullaby in Arabic, and that is what she proceeded to do. I should say quickly that these lullabies, from that lyric or letter, the lyrics are pulled out. Parents are asked to come up with their own melodies, their own musical ideas, and those are recorded and shared and celebrated. Now, we often in this field of early childhood talk about adverse childhood experiences, so early trauma in life that can impact or affect later health, behavioral, and social outcomes. There is early research that does indicate that close parent-child relationships and parent well-being can help mitigate the impact of these ACEs. But when we're doing this work through Lullaby, we are not necessarily focusing on the parent's trauma, right? We really are focusing on that healing-centered engagement, strength-based approaches. So focusing on the parent's well-being, their sense of creativity, as Jill said, agency and resilience, really centering that in this creative process. We work very closely with an outside consultant, Kima Bunch-Smith, and she shared this idea of funds of knowledge with us. And it's something that has really resonated with our teaching artists, our musicians, and our team, really centering the fact that our community members, if we're going into a new community, we are not imposing what we think this should be. We need to step back and learn from the community, learn from our parents, have them really center this process in their strengths, in their skill set. That could be their language, that could be their culture, that could be their home practices, the things that they do with their children. I wanted to share this article from Sean Ginwright. I'll share a link in the chat afterwards, but he does talk about how you can shift sort of from this trauma-informed care mindset to healing engagement mindset. He argues specifically, and people can disagree and engage with the text, but it does resonate. How can we think about shifting from people as their trauma to really focusing on the possibility, where they could be, where they want to be, and really focusing on their sense of well-being. One of the things that we did through this project is work closely with evaluators at Wolf Brown to look at the impact around well-being. This is from a few years ago, but our evaluator spoke specifically with families, interviewed them, and looked at the language that they used in describing themselves as parents within the lullaby experience versus outside of the lullaby experience. And using Seligman's PERMA framework, really looking at how they talked about positive emotions, their relationships, their sense of achievement and meaning, connections. And you can see quite a difference between how they spoke about themselves in Lullaby versus outside of Lullaby. This next video that you're about to see is from a mom who is part of the program. Her name is Aracelis, and she'll talk a little bit about her work in Lullaby.
Yo chequeaba mi embarazo en el Hospital Burro. Ahí fue que me llevaron a una pequeña oficina y me hablaron del proyecto de que escribiera una carta para mi bebé. Solo me quedaba una semana de embarazo. Luego me sorprendieron, me dijeron, ¿quieres ponerle música? Yo, ¡ay, estoy en mis aguas! Sí, claro, por supuesto.
What's my vibe again?
Se llama Mi Niña Hermosa. Es dedicada a mi bebé, Jairelis.
Perfecto.
Eso es lo que siempre sentí. Que es mi regalo, es mi milagro, porque en realidad la deseaba. Mi niña hermosa. Claro, me preguntaron que qué ritmo le gustaba a la bebé. Y yo le dije, merengue. Cuando yo le ponía merengue, ella brincaba mucho en mi pancita, en mi barriguita. Entonces, por eso le buscamos un ritmo bien animado. Que siempre te voy a proteger. Eso va a ser su regalo de mí, de ustedes, para ella. Es una emoción muy grande. Te amo, princesa, te amo, princesa. Te amo, princesa.
So that was an example of one mom's experience, but there are various experiences that our parents have, but we always try to celebrate the songs that they write. You know, many families enter this and might say, oh, well, I'm not a singer. Aracelis was very confident as a singer. But, you know, that's part of the creative process in feeling that sense of agency over the songwriting, and to be able to pass that down to their children and perhaps generations afterwards. So we do try to really celebrate that through concert experiences, through recording experiences. You can listen to hundreds of parent recordings on our SoundCloud page. The link is here. We'll post that in the chat. And I just wanted to end with this lovely quote. This is actually an album, Hopes and Dreams, that features a range of recorded lullabies by celebrity musicians like Angelique Kidjo and Roseanne Cash, and all proceeds go back to the original songwriters in the program. So this is a lovely mom, Odette, and her son, Esso, and this is what she had to say about her experience. But in the sake of time, if you have any other questions, I look forward to chatting with you more, or if you're interested in learning how you might get involved with the program, you can contact me at this email. Thank you.
Tiffany, thanks. The work you all are doing there is just extraordinary. And I mean, I know I had a big grin on my face through all of it. I saw many of the panelists did as well. And I'm sure many of you out there in the ether did too. Just want to thank you and congratulate you for that work that you do. It's so important. I want to go back. I screwed up, as I do sometimes, and I had planned actually to lead off this entire conversation with Michael, and I didn't mean to not do it. I think I maybe just needed to breathe in a way that would have embodied my brain better somehow, but I didn't. I failed, and so I want to turn to Michael and have him talk a little bit about what it is this work is and what it does. And so, Michael, if we can curl back around and have you say some things around that.
No problem. Excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone. And no worries. We're not all built to be on Zoom 24/7. This is like that. So all the mistakes happen and it's all good. And I think it's actually kind of kismet that we started with these great examples, and then I can define trauma a little deeper. And like, I think the context will probably land a little differently in a good way. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm also going to set a timer for myself so I don't talk about trauma all day. One of the things that I think is important with trauma, and I think the two projects, or the series of projects, even because Jill talked about a couple different things, or the projects and classroom work, is that this work should center back on our humanity. And when we just focus only on trauma, and again, I really appreciated what both the speakers have said thus far, we can actually focus on things that dehumanize people by mistake, right? And unintentionally. So I like to start with the fact that before we even define trauma, the first thing we have to do is situate trauma in the context of what it means to be human. And because that's been a very difficult journey for us as a country for many centuries, I like to take a developmentalist approach, which says, that human beings develop in four dynamic and co-occurring dimensions at the same time: the biological, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual. And spiritual not being about religion, but about the context of meaning making, that human beings are creatures of meaning making, and we make meaning even when there is no meaning given to us in a context or a moment. We have autobiographical narrative as a way that we organize ourselves in the world. Cultures have organized through story using art and various forms of art for millennia. This is a part of who we are as a species and the way that we make sense of the world, but not just the way that we make sense of the world in the like, do I understand the world context? It also impacts the way that we do survival-based things like predict our way through the world, right? Our meaning-making apparatus, if you will, or mechanism is a part of that faculty of prediction and therefore expectation management. So this dimension of what we call spiritual, again, not religious, but meaning making, is part and parcel to our humanity and is co-occurring with these other three dimensions, and they're dynamic in that they're influencing one another, right? The way your personal psychology is developing over time and the way you are experiencing the world does have a biological impact on your body. Your social relationships have an impact on the way that you understand and see the world at the spiritual dimension, if you will, but also the psychological dimension of your thinking world. So again, these are co-occurring dynamic dimensions that all together are making up the context of our humanity and the context of our human development. So with that said, trauma, it's important to understand trauma impacts all of those dimensions of our development, impacts all of those dimensions of our humanity across the entire lifespan. There are so many great definitions of trauma. I stick with this one from the American Psychiatric Association, however, because there are some specific qualifiers that I think lends itself to the artistic world and the idea of artistic practice, particularly from the context of meaning making. And so this idea that trauma involves a perceived or literal threat to one's physical or emotional well-being, and that it elicits, it's going to bring out intense feelings of helplessness, terror, a lack of control. So we can also think about powerlessness, right? We can think about situations that are absolutely inescapable. There are other definitions of trauma that talk about the event being something that you cannot escape, no matter how much you willed it, tried, put energy out, nothing you did work. The other definition I want to submit comes from a scholar and practitioner that Jill referred to, Bessel van der Kolk. Bessel van der Kolk says that a traumatic event is when whatever is happening to you overwhelms your internal and external abilities to cope, right? And so those are the two, that definition and this one are the two I like to sit in, because again, there are qualifiers, because we use language pretty colloquially. And so we'll say things like, oh my God, I was sitting in traffic, it was traumatic. And maybe it could be traumatic. Like, let's say you were on your way to visit a parent in the hospital, your child was hurt, like there's something of high value on the line, time is a pressure, and you might not feel like you can escape the moment to get to that person's aid, then that could be traumatic. But if you are legitimately just kind of chilling on a Saturday, traffic hits, maybe that's just annoying and not traumatic, right? So it's important that we have qualifiers, because it can be very difficult to understand trauma and the life experience of another person, because I can't tell you what's traumatic or not in your life. I can't tell you what made you feel helpless or powerless, or like you had a total lack of control, or that you felt terror in a given moment. I can practice really good active listening and build a trusting relationship with you, where through story sharing and storytelling and the sharing of meaning making, you can express to me that you felt those things. And then it's up to me to, as a good listener, right? And someone who cares, to then hear that and go, oh, wow, that might have been a traumatic experience for that person. And then ask myself new questions. How can I show up on this person's behalf? How can I be a better listener to this person? And even directly getting to the point of asking that person, how best can I support you in this moment or in the context of what you've experienced, right? So all trauma is stressful. All stressors are not inherently traumatic. Again, all trauma is inherently stressful. All stressors are not inherently traumatic. So I just like to point people back to this idea of our basic biology. Your stress mechanism is a part of your survival. It's ridiculously old. You cannot outpace it. You can't beat it. You can't cut it off. You can't disrupt it from carrying out full actions over time, but you cannot stop it from being initiated, because we're talking about mechanisms in the body that operate at the level of like thousandths of a millisecond, right? So again, you can't stop it, but you can disrupt. So a couple of things I want to note here for you. Your body's going to respond to an emotional or physical stressor in a number of different ways. Again, you don't really have conscious choice on it. What's going to demonstrate to your body what's most advantageous in the moment is the way that it's made sense, back to meaning making, the way that it's made sense of its own sense of safety from other circumstances that have threatened it in the past, and based on the kinds of relationships that have been around you throughout development as you've been learning to respond and cope to stress. And this stuff gets a little tricky because, like, take fighting, for example, or this idea of initiating engagement with your stressor. That can look like an aggressive email in 2021, right? Like, it's not just physically fighting somebody. The same with freezing. Freezing is a tricky one because we're talking about pedagogy. So in classrooms, quiet students don't mean, or having a student that's silent or quiet does not mean that that student is okay. It just means that they're quiet. And so we have to learn to compassionately interrogate silence and, open up a practice of story sharing and meaning making amongst ourselves and in classroom spaces, so that a young person or even an adult can feel encouraged over time to practice sharing in a way that's been modeled for them as being safe based on what's been taking place in the classroom. But none of these responses are inherently bad, but they can be not as advantageous to helping you reclaim safety in those moments where your body is telling you it's been accosted. These things get tricky over time because sometimes that aggressive email is just going to create more stress and trauma than it is going to actually alleviate the fear and the threat that's present. Here's some examples of chronic stressors. And these are ones that I picked based on that regardless of funds and money are still really stressful. Take parenting alone, doesn't matter how much money you have, the kid wants your time, not your money. So you're always kind of coming up short and there's no alleviation there. So some stressors are habitual, they become chronic or relentlessly stressful, and that definitely has a wear and tear on the body. And things that are chronically stressful can easily become traumatic. But again, all stressors are not traumatic, though all trauma does incur stress in the body. So what this means for us is we got to understand that stress can exist at all of these levels or all of these dimensions. Trauma disrupts all of these dimensions. And we live in a complex world where humans have built systems within systems within systems. And so all of these, to Jill's point around racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, classism, you name it, all of these things are playing out at these varying levels of systems that we've created. So an article like what Tiffany talked about, from Sean Ginwright, where we're able to start reimagining what it means to position healing and position joy and position, thriving as a human right. And what does it mean in the context of understanding trauma and the systems-based ways and interpersonal ways that it plays out? It means we have this opportunity to center our humanity in a new way. And so how do we ask new questions, right? what does it mean to think about our classrooms, our projects, and our spaces and places, whatever we're doing, designing, and think about spiritual risk or harm, or the risk or harm to the dimension of somebody's meaning making. What does it mean to think about safety in the context of their meaning making? What does it mean to have to consider psychological well-being in the context of project design? Trauma-informed care will get us to the doorway, and then we have to then open it up to consider these other constructs. So I do encourage you to read that article that Tiffany referenced, because it's a great step in that direction. And to close out, you know, the age-old adage here in the trauma-informed care world is that we're moving from a paradigm of what's wrong with someone or what's wrong with a thing to understanding that it's about what's happened to them. And then I like to add in a third question that we're moving into, and I'll talk about the future a little later, and that's what can happen now with intentionality. Now that we've learned about trauma, now that we understand dehumanization and racism, sexism, et cetera, the way that plays out interpersonal and systems level, what can we do now with intentional design and intentional learning to curate the life and experiences that people want to have? So thank you, I'm done. And I turn it back over to the team.
Michael, that was awesome and informative. Thank you. Raphael, you come at this from the lens of social work, which I think is fantastic. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about this work from your perspective?
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, I do a lot of, when we think about trauma, we heard the word healing a lot. And I wrote a book called The Healing Power of Hip Hop. And a lot of times when people hear hip hop, they're like, how in the world can that be healing? Because mostly it's what they pay attention to on the radio and things like that. But the reality is that the origins of hip hop culture came from a very traumatic period for a lot of communities. And it's really anchored in, you know, everything that we have been talking about, is this ability to cope and manage and persevere and overcome adversity. And we were talking about the immediate experiences of the Bronx and tri-state area at the origins of hip hop culture. We were talking about disinvestment in communities and, you know, a lot of poverty and things that came from inequities and injustices in the system to create an environment where people struggled a lot. But a very rich culture emerged out of that. And when we talk about hip hop, we're talking about a culture, whether we're talking about MCing and DJing or B-boy and B-girl and dancing, graffiti, visual art, and this coalescing knowledge of self, which is this constant self-reflection and social awareness, where we're kind of making sense of our place in the world and really critiquing the world around that has created conditions for so many. It's a really rich culture of empowerment. And that's really what hip hop culture is. It's really a gift. And, you know, we think about times like this, like COVID and all the social justice issues. There's this enormous gift that many communities have and embrace with hip hop. And that's really what the foundation of my work is, from a research and practice side, is really thinking about the culture as a tool of empowerment to promote well-being. And thinking about, you know, everything that has been discussed here in promoting assets, recognizing cultural strengths, and using art as a medium to promote positive development in the short term and the long term. So I love that discussion of, you know, moving beyond just survival mode to thriving. And that's the anchor of my research and really where it addresses trauma, but trauma from, as everyone said, this much more empowerment, life course based approach. And so in my work, we have the research side, but we also have the practice side. We believe in active creative engagement. Beautiful example of the Lullaby Project. We use hip hop in a similar capacities, classes, workshops, conference, and basically designing music experiences to promote positive development. I'll give you one example. We have a mixtape camp that we do in the summers where we bring young people together and create opportunities for them to create music, videos, things like that. So give you a short piece from one of our projects, a student reflecting on this.
We have been able to blend the understanding that when young people are engaged in school, it's for much more than academics. It's for academic development for sure, but it's also for social and emotional development.
I was in the lyrics team, and within that lyrics team, I was able to express myself creatively through words and then through rhyme within those words. It was really fun for sure. I'm going to see if I can try doing it again within my spare time.
So this lab is a great opportunity. We have been able to run different music workshops and classes before, but never really had a dedicated space in general, but also a dedicated space with industry level equipment, software, technology, as well as the structured opportunity for an audio engineer, someone that is in the music business, to work directly with young people.
When I started with music, it actually showed me like a path to go. I could actually have the confidence to express what I want to say. You know, I'll always use music to help me relieve my stress. I put my earphones in, I close my eyes, and when I listen to certain artists sing their songs, they always send me a message.
That's a quick little snippet of one of the projects that we worked on. And so that's kind of on the research and practice side. I also have an administrative hat, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that because from an administrative side, we have the responsibilities of thinking about our students that are matriculating through the program, but we're also human beings, right? We're also faculty members that have families and lives and responsibilities, and we're coping in the same way that our students are. And I think it's an important piece of the conversation here I wanted to touch on. And so for us, we recognize that there is a collective trauma that people have been experiencing. And we noticed mental health trends pre-COVID, where students were already struggling, and that had changed over time. And so we were working to think about, okay, how do we help our students? And we primarily focused on kind of a basic needs level, right? Connecting people to counselors. People were struggling with basic need issues, food, shelter, that kind of thing. So from a very concrete sort of social services standpoint, we were trying to connect people. But then COVID hit. And what really came out of that was, all right, all of those things amplified, particularly around the, not being sure, the anxiety of not being sure, am I gonna get sick? And but also the social isolation from each other as students, from family, all that kind of stuff. And then recognizing what we were going through as well. And the idea of community really rose to the top. Everybody recognized the importance of community. And so on the faculty side, what we started meeting regularly to just kind of process what was going on. COVID, social justice, our own lives. And so we created 2 regular committees, and not even committees, they weren't committees, but groups where people could come together. And one was just to kind of process, one was a little bit more strategic. How can we organize for our students? And so I only have a little bit of time, but creating that community and space was incredibly important in thinking about how we could, you think of the airplane idea, right? You can't help others till you help yourself. So that was very important from a faculty standpoint. Out of that came recognition of kind of three types of students that we wanted to address. One is the general student body as a whole. And then those that seem to be struggling a little bit, but they were kind of a priority group. It wasn't necessarily crisis, but students that we were concerned about. First generation students, for us, male students. And then we had the crisis group. You know, how do we respond to those that are actively in crisis, maybe in a different way than we did before by just referring them to a counselor. And so that came out as very important, but under this guise of community. So we started having regular town halls for just students in general. And what we found out, again, coming back to this idea of community, was that just simply having these town halls regularly, just talked earlier about sort of the regularity, right? The stability and structure, that was super important. And students said things like, you know, just being here is important. Just seeing your face, as much as we don't like Zoom, just seeing your face in Zoom and knowing as a collective faculty that you care about us and are concerned was very powerful, important. Another thing, talking about priority groups, we had for a long time, we recognized that our male students within social work, which is predominantly non-male profession, our students talked about, you know, feeling disconnected and these sort of barriers to continuing in the program. And so we launched a group called MenSW, which was meant to build community, support students, but also talk about issues that may be specific to men, either as students or as professional social workers out in the field. And so that was really important. The last point I wanted to share is kind of as faculty, the thing that came up that was important, and a lot of us that are in the work recognize this, and it was talked about earlier by several people on this panel about this kind of idea of continuous traumatic stress, is that COVID, so the social justice issues really allowed people to understand that for some communities, the trauma doesn't stop, right? It's this real, you know, as Mike just talked about, this sort of physiological non-stopness of trauma and not being able to catch a breath. And how do you respond in environments like that, and trying to create, you know, even if it's not total alleviation of the trauma, these sort of micro doses of respite and healing, how important that is. So I just wanted to kind of touch on the two sides, the two hats that I wear where trauma intersects. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with everyone. And if you want to learn more about any of this work, this is some of my information.
Raphael, thanks so much. I really appreciate those two hats. It's, as an administrator myself, it's been quite a challenge this year to try to navigate this for everyone and to try to lead through that. So thank you for that information. There are two beautiful questions in the Q&A, neither of which I think I could have written. So thank you to those of you that did. The first question is around thoughts around embodiment versus disembodiment in a classical music education environment. What are the benefits of more embodied music making and learning, and what changes do you think music schools should make to support that? And any of you could respond. I think this comes out of the question around, I think one of you raised, Jill, I think it was you, around effects of trauma on the physical body. And, you know, how, and I was communicating with Christina in the background saying, we need a question around how that physicalness impacts musicians as they sing or perform.
So, I mean, I can answer that briefly, but Elle, I'm probably going to direct you to some people whose work I think you might already know because they appeared at the trauma conference where you were a participant. But yeah, so I think first of all, we have to acknowledge that musicians have bodies and that those bodies do all kinds of things, and that those bodies are not just for music making. I mean, I think that numerous people's points about the humanity of people is really important. So I always see my students as not just musicians, but as full, complete humans who have a range of experiences, and a lot of those experiences are going to affect their bodies. So I think Lucy DeGray, for instance, talked really beautifully about the ways that a traumatic experience impacted her ability to sing, to use her voice at all, and that she had to find teachers who were willing to work with her to help her draw out her voice, to find ways to access her voice. So, I mean, I do think that in terms of what kinds of supports people we can provide in music schools, I mean, I think we have some of those supports depending on the school. I can say that from my experience, and I was an injured musician. I mean, I think the other thing that we have to acknowledge is that musicians get injured, and that if your entire identity is as a musician, then that is something that can be really traumatic for a lot of people. And so I do think that there are numerous different practices that that can help. So a lot of schools have Feldenkrais or Alexander technique that are very body focused. So I think that encouraging people, making sure that you have a connection, and I think even providing that, like for a lot of people, that's very expensive. I could take it as part of my coursework, which was really great when I was an undergraduate student. So I think giving students more opportunities to engage with people who acknowledge the wholeness of their bodies and help them understand their bodies better and how that relates to their music making is something we could do. I will stop talking now.
Jill, thank you. There's another question here from Janet Underhill. Janet is going to be at a camp. She's doing 2 in-person camps this summer, 1-day camp and another 2-week sleepaway camp, where all of us have had no in-person music making since March 2020. In particular, the sleepaway camp, where all the faculty and students will be in an isolated bubble in Maine. Sounds wonderful. And as of now, can't leave. That part sounds less wonderful. I'm concerned about how we will be able to cope. It seems to me we're trying to go back to the old normal, but the old normal no longer exists. Do any of you have any advice? Would you recommend trauma training for the faculty and staff beforehand? Should we have a professional therapist as part of the team? What would be best practice in this case? Any thoughts on that?
Go for it.
Well, I guess one of my questions was in terms of the ability to cope with being together after not having been together. Is that the issue, or is it coming into the experience with the right frame of mind? Or is it concern that that someone will have a reaction that will not be able to manage? I guess I'd be curious as to what the driving question is there with that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Janet, if you'd like to put that into the chat, we'd be happy to take a look at that and address that more specifically. I know for some of our students, they're just so excited to get back to music making collaboratively. They're so excited. We're, at least here at Peabody, we're not seeing that kind of level of challenge. The bigger challenge are, I think, student injuries as they get back to playing together more quickly, right? So we're trying to be careful of what we're programming just to make sure that we're not asking too much of the students at the outset. Michael, what about you? Do you have a response to that as we wait for Janet to potentially?
Yeah, I think, so separating out the training piece, I think everybody needs to be trained on trauma. I don't think it needs to stop there, but I do think for the context of the world that we live in, how absolutely on Front Street, all of the dehumanization issues, they're just there, they're so present. And everybody is metabolizing that, even young people, from a number of ways and in a number of ways. And I think we have to make space for that. We have to stop isolating aspects of our humanity and isolating the way that we experience systems, because the notion of systems theory is that people experience systems all at one time. We're not just experiencing the education system or this system or a family system. You actually are living through the collision of all of those systems at one time. I mean, that's society, right? And so I think the more space we provide to equip staff with the language and frames that allow them to even just hold space for young people to process, the more that we equip staff with language around emotional and social intelligence-based constructs so that they're modeling that with young people or their students and their peers, and then providing the space for them to engage and using that language in those frames. I think all of that's important, even if we didn't go through a pandemic. It's just, we better take advantage of the moment while we have it, and the pandemic's at least provided that room and opportunity. That's my thought. And a quick shameless plug, I meant to mention this while I was talking earlier, but I have a project that I just finished up. It's still undone, but we had to get to a moment of being done for the funders. It's called the Connected Community. It's a trauma-informed community development curriculum. I don't like that terminology personally, but the design team needed something that could catch people's attention. But there's a link that I know Christina will drop into the chat, but it provides options in some free open source content to train people around these ideas and trauma and how it relates to aspects of community development, whether that's a small group, a neighborhood, urban setting, et cetera.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Raphael?
I'll respond a little bit since with the clarity. So interestingly enough, the work that we do over the summer came out of helping a summer program evaluate their work. There's a really quick version. This was a program that was designed to address summer learning loss. And in the evaluation, we found that there was a big chunk of students that had elevated anxiety and depression. And what came out of this was this realization of, we now call summer strain, is that with students leaving, it's not just the academics where there are issues, but leaving the relationships with teachers, their friends, the structure, even being away from home, which sometimes is a toxic environment. That in the summer, you have a lot of mental health concerns. And that actually started our work around building in, music and mental health during the summer. And so we've had several summer projects, but the thing that's consistent is how much students appreciate that sense of community and being able to come together, work on a project, something that maybe they didn't think they could do, having a tangible outcome, a song, a video, doing this collective project together helps reduce stress, helps reduce anxiety, helps reduce depression. And so to the question of how they'll react about not being together, I think they'll react with extreme enthusiasm and excitement for not having the ability to be together in community with folks, but at the same time recognize that there probably should be some support available, whether it's on-site or just access to someone, is to have some sort of therapeutic support available that folks could reach out to if needed.
Thank you very much. There's one more question in the Q&A, and Michael, I wonder if you can address it in 1 minute or less. It's specifically for you. Can you please speak more about the bonding responses to stressors? I'm familiar with fight, flight, and freeze, but not the latter.
Sure, yes, this is a fascinating area because stress responses are not as simple as flight, fight. You get what I'm saying, just to the sake of time. Stuff on myself. So there are other forms. Bonding is one. Capitulation is another one that's being explored. So I'll explain them really quickly. Bonding is based on the fact that human beings are born helpless, right? Infants are born half cooked. We got to go through another core 6 years of development to get to a point where we're kind of like finally a full little human. And then we still have a whole long ways to go before we're, arriving at about ages 27 to 30 as like, oh, I'm kind of fully formed. So all that being said, the most helpless stage is you are actually always reaching out and bonding. You are always crying out for help for someone that is older, has more physical capacity, can respond to your emotional needs, etc. That does not dissipate just because we get older and we gain more autonomy. And so it begins to look differently based on the age and capacity and what stressors are present. But it's the seed of this bonding can be the seed of us and them, right? Which is also very deeply rooted into how brains are organizing the world and patterns and shapes and the way we interpret things and make meaning. We do dichotomize and put things in groups to make sense of the world. The problem is, again, in relationship to stress and the fact that from our earliest periods of life, we are reaching out, whether through cries or literally reaching with our physical hands for someone to alleviate stress. That doesn't go away. It can look like water cooler culture if you're in a corporate setting and you're older. It can look like, again, after 9/11, there's a whole lot of us and them and nationalism on the rise in very particular kinds of ways in response to these larger systemic threats around our existence, right? So there's this area of study called terror management theory, which is fascinating about what individuals and groups do when the threat of death and extinction is imminent, whether that's, again, in a localized setting in a neighborhood or nationalized settings, like, you know, again, responding to threats of terror. Capitulation is the response of when you actually give in to the stressor. It's just, to your body, safer to go along with what's about to happen than it is to try to fight or run or freeze. And again, your body's not making these decisions consciously. These are happening at quick levels before you're even conscious of the thought. Like, you've literally made up your mind on what you're going to do before you're even aware of what you're about to do, because it's not conscious. And so there are all of these responses are fine because they're normal responses to abnormal things happening to you that are costing your safety in any one of those dimensions of our human development. The problem just becomes, does it create more problem on the other end of the moment, right? After you've responded to the thing, and how can you address it? That was not 1 minute, and I apologize.
It's okay. I want to thank you all. I will acknowledge I came into this conversation not knowing much about the work that you all do, and I have learned an incredible amount through this process, and I hope our attendees have as well. And I actually believe that more of this will need to come to the fore over the next many months as we start to return to whatever normal looks like, and more of these conversations need to occur in all of our organizations. I want to thank all of you, Jill, Tiffany, Raphael, Michael. I also want to thank again Adam, Anna, and Christina on the background. A full list of sessions, upcoming presenters, and previous sessions are all available on our Peabody Keep Teaching website. We'll hope you'll consider tuning in again.